What is up, guys? Welcome to my Superman and Lois Season 3, Episode 10, almost forgot then, recap, review, and breakdown. So I thought this episode was quite a good one. We actually had a ton of things happen, from, Carl catching on a little bit. Well, actually, he didn't catch on a little bit more. I thought they were going to trickle it out towards the finale, but no, he must have put it together by now after seeing Clark fly off into the air. What is going on with the superpowered people in town? We had a lot of cool Lex Luthor set up, and this all makes sense as well with regards to the fact that we only have 3 episodes left after this, and it makes sense. We also had Peia going freaking crazy at the end. So let's go throughout the events of this episode, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in that comment section, any theories you have, and go on to like this video if you do, of course, enjoy it, and hey, dislike it if you dislike it. Right at the beginning, we have Lois talking about her cancer because her chemotherapy is over and she is ringing the bell. Everyone is present for that, just like what we saw with Peia and Bruno Mannheim a few episodes back. And this is when we're now at the Kent farm and we have the secret wife of Bruno Mannheim story that has been published by the Smallville Gazette. And we have Lois saying that she still thinks it wasn't the right thing to do. Now, maybe I'm going crazy here, but I felt like we had that episode where she was umming and ahhing between it, and then she ultimately thought that it was the right thing to do, but maybe I'm forgetting, so do let me know. And he's still yet to return the things that he stole from the DoD, such as the XK, the Bizarro Corpse, and whatnot. So if he wants to see his wife, he will, but we know that's not really Bruno's plan. He had a whole different plan in mind to this episode, which also introduces some very interesting things moving forward for particular characters with regards to the cure for cancer, unless it has side effects. We're gonna have to wait and see about that, but I'm looking forward to talking about that a little bit later on in this review and getting your thoughts as well down in the comments. So this is where we have Lois saying, right, maybe he'll change his mind if we get a confession out of Peia. So that was Lois's story this episode, and we'll revisit that. But meanwhile, with Lana, she has a meeting with Governor Wexler, was it? Chrissy is covering the visit. Obviously a little bit awkward, but kind of not. Meanwhile, we have Sarah meet up with George Dean Jr. because there's a party and he asked her to go to that. This reflects onto the boys' storyline as well. Speaking of the boys, we have Clark this episode really want to hang out with them. So this is when the boys get invited to that senior party or whatever it was, and we have Jonathan invited by Sarah, and we have Jordan be like, Sarah texted you? I was like, oh, I was thinking in this moment, and you can't blame me, because even though Superman and Lois is far and above the typical CW cliches, I was thinking, man, please do not have Sarah and Jonathan have this little love triangle between Jordan. Like, do you know what I mean? Maybe 5 years ago that would have happened on the CW if Superman and Lois came out much, much earlier. But I don't think they're going that direction, thank God. But I think this was mainly just to highlight Jordan's awkwardness still. I think he has come a long way since him and Sarah split up, but he's kind of awkward in general. For example, when they went to the party later, he's like, where do I go? My brother is with his girlfriend. Sarah's talking to the George Dean Jr. I'm going to try and fit in. And, I think that rubbed him the wrong way because he tried to fit in, but it was just a bit awkward. And I think he was a bit socially awkward because maybe you wouldn't do that if 2 people were having a conversation and you're like, oh, yeah, what do you spend the money on? Do you even know what we're talking about, kind of thing? So, it was a bit of an interesting situation, but overall, yeah, Jordan, this episode is still just a little bit off when it comes to blending in and also getting used to seeing Sarah just not really be with him and talking to other people. But I did feel bad for Clark in the initial moments of the episode, and what I mean by that is we'll talk about what I feel like is a little bit of an overreaction later, but Clark is only human as well, which is what I think they wanted to highlight with his struggles this episode and his possible overreaction, and I want to get your thoughts on that. But he returns back in this moment, really goofy. I miss seeing that side of Clark because we saw a bit more of that goofy version of him, that nerdy version of him, like when he was the football coach in previous seasons, and he just wanted to go to the Wrestle Rumble 40 in Metropolis. And as Jonathan said later on, we had plans to kind of make plans, but they somewhat ditched their dad. But obviously, they didn't let Clark know exactly where they were going, what they were doing, and Clark is a bit like, Oh. But anyway, meanwhile at the DOD with Lois, she goes to speak with Peia. And in this moment, things got pretty interesting because we had Lois ask if, Boss Moxie ever was suspicious of her relationship with Bruno. And she says, well, we weren't dating that long before Boss Moxie was murdered by Lex Luthor. And we all know that's a lie. So Lois calls her out on that and says, well, I listened to Luthor's confession tape again, and I don't think that was him on the tape. It was you. So Lois really puts it in her face. Yeah, you just used Lex Luthor as a fall guy. But the coolest part of this conversation, and I guess maybe you could say it was a bit cheesy in dialogue, but I kind of really dig how much and how formidable they're making Lex Luthor seem to be, especially with the fact that we're on episode 10 now. We've only got 3 episodes left, and I believe from what we're hearing, season 4 was meant to elevate Lex Luthor up a bit more. And I say meant as if it's been cancelled already, but, hopefully we will still see a major Lex Luthor storyline in season 4. But anyway, we have Peia saying, have you ever been in a room alone with Lex Luthor? You'd have to think that Lois has. When she goes on to say he has this aura, it's terrifying. Like you're in the presence of the devil himself. And this is what I mean by maybe a bit of cheesy dialogue. But if you're kind of engrossed in it and you're like really like Lex, you're like, oh, damn. And I feel like the Titans version of Lex really got that, formidable demeanor off on screen quite well. And I really hope we have Michael Cudlitz do the same thing. And I do think he has that kind of presence about him. But she says, to this day, that man is the only person in the world that scares me. So yeah, get hype because things could be very interesting, and it does seem that the whole Lex thing will lead to a cliffhanger. But Lois says in this moment, but he didn't kill Moxie or his men, you did. And this is where something interesting gets brought up that you guys were talking about in the comments section quite a bit. So it's going to be interesting to revisit this again in today's comments section. And this is when Peia says, well, I could tell you about a dozen other crimes that Luthor committed that were far worse than what happened to Boss Moxie with regards to Peia killing him. Like, Luthor's done a billion other things worse than that. Lois then says, but the thing is, I helped put a man in jail or behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. And Peia says, and the world is better for it. So this is the debate that I want you guys to have down in the comments, or with me as well, or with each other. A healthy debate, mind you. What do you think about this? Because I think with regards to Lois, it's about integrity. Peia has a point, right? Luthor has done so many worse things, but Lois is like, I get that, but he's still behind bars and paying 20 years of time for something that he didn't do. How do you feel about that? Do you think, well, who cares because he's done all of these other things? Or are you kind of still on the side of like the integrity, the law, the truth? And that's the main word. I think they want to use the truth of it. That the thing is, if he's in jail for the wrong crime, he still needs to be tried in court for all the other things that he's done with proof, and he needs to get put away for those things. He can't get put away with something that he didn't do, even though he's a really bad guy. And I admit, it's a bit of a conflicting situation because, at face value, it seems like an easy thing to answer, doesn't it? Like, this guy's done worse things than how Peia killed Boss Moxie. Well, he should be in jail, right? But those things haven't been proven, technically. And what he is in jail for, he didn't actually do. So if we just did that to every person out there, it could get a bit messy, legally, ethically, and everything like that. But when Peia said Lex Luthor was a monster before he went to prison, can you imagine what he's become since? Setting him free would be the biggest mistake of your life. That is what got me hyped. I think that was the line most of all, because he, as I've said, ever since we got the teasers, he has been in there for 20 years. He was a monster before all of this. Done far worse things than what Peia and Bruno have ever done combined. And now he's been seething behind bars for 20 years thinking about how Lois Lane and Clark Kent put him away. Yeah, that would be a sick season 4 villain. And I hope we get a really kind of high note ending off this season with him coming out of jail. Because obviously he's going to. We've seen it in the teasers. But oh man, it's probably going to be a big cliffhanger. And if we don't get season 4, oh my god, that's gonna sting. But meanwhile, we have the continuation of the story with Kyle investigating whoever has superpowers in Smallville. And he introduces the somewhat evidence to Chrissy. And obviously, this is a big conflict of interest with her because she's aware of the secret. She knows Superman's identity. She knows that, Jordan it has powers. So it's kind of awkward that she's romantically involved with Kyle, who's really trying to push this big story. And at face value, it is like, well, yeah, this would be something Chrissy would get on top of if she didn't know the secret. The same thing happens with Lana this episode, with his daughter Sarah, and I kind of felt bad for him because he was just more or less being gaslighted all episode, because he knows there's something more going on, and they're like, are you crazy? But anyway, back at the party, this is when Jordan hears the cops coming, and this is where things get really out of control. Everyone starts running away. We have Sarah and George Dean Jr. get in her car. She turns the lights off so the police don't see her leave. And I was thinking the whole time, why aren't you turning the lights back on? Why aren't you turning the lights back on? But she did, and as she did, she almost hit a deer. She swerved, and the car started, like, that would have been literally death. Like, it would have been a miracle to survive. But that's when Jordan, being Jordan, keeping an eye on Sarah, saves her. Like, just as she's barrel rolling, we get that cool slow-mo. I felt like the CGI of the car and the deer was a bit iffy, but you know, it's network television. But anyway, he flies them out of there. Now, this is when Kyle is there, and we have the police basically saying, look, man, we can't turn like a blind eye. Like, she drove under the influence, even if she wasn't mega drunk or anything like that, as she says later on. I guess to charge her with that, she would have to have been over the legal limit. And I don't know about anyone else, but I was just thinking in this moment, Lana is going to unleash on Sarah. But the thing is, she didn't. She didn't later on. That was super interesting. I thought, my God, if there's anything that Sarah could do that will give us another scene of Lana just going mental, it would be this. Which is when we had the police officers say, well, people don't always walk away from a wreck like this. And Mayor George Dean's kid, Jr., like, it's difficult to say, okay? Says, well, that's because someone saved us, which piques Carl's interest. He goes on to explain there was a blur. When I looked up, some guy was standing there. He just vanished. Sarah denies this. Carl can tell there's something iffy here. And I'm not gonna lie, guys. I feel like the way they framed it, and then, like, obviously Jordan just being like, oh, I might have been seen. He was just standing there after he rescued them. Like, literally, you're seeing it right now. He's standing there, and he could have got away a lot quicker instead of just standing there waiting to be noticed, if you know what I mean. Because, obviously, as a result of that, now more people got to ask questions. And I know he was concealed in his Superboy suit, the goggles, and everything like that. But, yeah, it was a little bit of a, hey, I'm just going to stand here to get noticed, so it contrivedly sets the story for people like Kyle to ask even more questions, and then I'll fly away. Even though I could have flown away instantly, but it is what it is. Now, this is when Jordan calls Clark, and this is where I spoke earlier and teased about Clark's overreaction. So Clark races home. Jordan informs him that he might have screwed up, but Clark reassures him that he did the right thing. I mean, what else could he do but save two people? But I would say that, did you stand there after the car wreck? Wait for them to see you? No, Dad. Actually, maybe, yeah, I did. Yeah, you screwed up, Jordan. But this is when Clark took things quite personally. He smelt beer, and Jordan confesses, yeah, there was this party. And with regards to Clark taking it personally, he's kind of like, well, was this before or after you cancelled our plans? Jordan's like, well, does it matter? I saved two people's lives. He's like, well, yeah, you lied to my face so you could go drink at a party. And the thing is, I don't think there's too much wrong with what the boys did. Like, Jonathan didn't even drink. Jordan had half a beer, for crying out loud. I think from what I've said on previous videos, I understand, you know, that is underage drinking and you shouldn't do that. But, you know, with what we're talking about here, with Clark wanting to ground him for a month, no powers or anything, the overreaction aspect of it is, as Jordan said, this isn't about me having beer, it's about me and John not wanting to hang out with you. And I think that is it. Because when we have Jonathan pull up, like, he instantly speeds after him, doesn't even think about it, pulls away his keys as super speed, immediately says, if you were drinking and driving, we are selling this truck. He's like, I wasn't drinking. He's like, but you were at a party. But I was drinking water. But your brother was drinking. It's like, okay, so do you want me to apologize for it? Like, do you know what I mean? So I think Jonathan summarized it very, very well when he says, we can't always just sit around and wait for you to have free time, you know, especially since they've got their own lives. He hasn't seen Candace in a month. I think if anyone is going to criticize Clark this episode, I mean, fair enough in some ways, but what I like with what this episode did here is that Clark, albeit he's Kryptonian, he was raised on Earth. What I'm trying to get to the bottom line of is that he can still be flawed. Superman is a great guy, don't get me wrong, so is Clark Kent. But I think what they're highlighting here is that through Clark taking it personally, they're showing him by the end of this episode that he's kind of reconciling with the fact that his kids are growing up, that they might not really view him as a priority anymore. But also there is an issue that if you want to spend time with the boys, it can be quite irritating if it's always on your time. Like, it's not on our time or like both of us figuring out. It's when you say so. Like, all of a sudden, that kind of thing, right? As Jonathan said, we can't just sit around and wait for you to have free time. Like, we have our own lives. Hopefully something will work out when we can make plans. But with Clark, it kind of seems to be like, oh, I have time now. Now you want to hang out with me. But hey, what if you're busy? Like, what if the other person's busy? That's the somewhat issue here. So there's lots of different things going on because Clark, is doing it out of love, but he's also like, there's complicated aspects to it because he is Superman, for crying out loud. So he does have quite a free pass there with how busy he is. So it kind of explores the very show of what this is. Superman and Lois, the fact that they have 2 teenage sons. He's Superman operating in a family. I felt like it was quite a good story that was explored, and I don't really blame them getting into how Clark was a bit emotionally impulsive and overreacted at times, because again, sometimes parents are like that. Back with Lana and Chrissy and the governor, this is when Kyle arrives with a police car out the front with Sarah inside it. So he tells Lana about totaling a car, the DUI that she's being served with, and the governor seems quite interested with the fact that it's the mayor's daughter, even seems to be gossiping a little bit about it, doesn't really seem impressed, so that may have dented a little bit of the optics for Lana. But back at their home, then it got awkward with regards to Carl saying, well, you still haven't been straight with me about what happened out there, the superhero who rescued them from the crash. And Lana knows full well what could be going on here, but again, Carl is made out to be a bit crazy. And I was just thinking, I guess it's not their secret to tell. And, Clark, in just a minute's time, eventually does basically reveal it. But I do feel like Kyle can know. I don't think he's going to do anything crazy with the information. I just think the reason why it was stalled all episode up until this point is because, obviously, other people like Lana and Sarah aren't going to tell Kyle Superman's secret, which is his to tell. Towards the end of the episode now, we have Lois going to speak to Peia again, and she basically agrees to talk about the whole Luthor framing thing, but she wants to explain things to Matteo first. But the thing is, earlier in the episode, we had Bruno with Matteo suiting him up, giving him cufflinks, and the second I saw this scene, I'm sure many of you realize this as well, there was something more going on here. And there was, because when Matteo comes into the DOD, he takes the cufflinks off, a little needle pops out, and he injects her with the cure, which, I guess cures her cancer. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Now, this is where Lois goes back in, and she says, you promised you would be honest about Luthor, and she was like, that was before. Before what? Before I got better. And then we had her head start to wobble again, and I always find that kind of creepy. So now that Peia has been cured of cancer, she's at full strength, of which we can assume again. She wants to leave the DOD, forces Lois to somewhat escort her out. She even blasts the door down to the control room, which sets off all the alarms for Superman to arrive. Now, while all of this was happening, we have Kyle come up to the Kent farm because he feels like he's put it all together, and that the superpowered person in town is actually Jonathan. Clark hears the destruction at the DOD, so this is very awkward because he's like, I need to fly away, and Lois, the whole DOD, everyone could be in danger, but if I do that in front of him, well, then I expose everything. Kyle even tries to walk past Clark in this moment saying, oh, I'm going to go see him because he sees Jonathan. He's right there. But Clark puts his hand out very gently and Kyle bounces back without even a little flinch of Clark's hand. I love it when they show moments like this. And that's when we get that moment where he says, go home, Kyle. I'll explain it to you all tomorrow. And he darts off into the sky. And Kyle there is just like, holy crap. So I hope after this, just my little reaction from this, that that this isn't going to be like a weird dramatic storyline, like he just absorbs it. I wish you all could have just told me sooner. I feel a bit embarrassed that Lana knows, Chrissy knows. This could create problems for him and Chrissy. I hope that he would be open-minded enough to know that this isn't her secret to tell. All of that stuff. Do you see what I mean? There's all of this stuff that they could play with, and I hope they don't dramatize it too much. I hope he's just like, oh, well, I'm not going to expose you even more. I think Smallville deserves to know who Superman is. I hope they don't go down that storyline, and Carl just kind of absorbs it, And there might be a bit of talking about it with him saying something like, I wish I could have known sooner. Why didn't you trust me or something? But I hope that's the extent of it. Now, by the time Superman gets to the DOD, it's already too late. Peia has escaped and people are busted up. And this is when Peia arrives back to the little experiment basement, if you will, where Bruno and Matteo were hanging out. And that's the end of the episode. Like, so Bruno Mannheim now has the cure for cancer. But the thing is, what I'm hoping is that this drug has some kind of weird side effect. Because, yeah, Peia may be cured right now and she may seem well, but a resolution to kind of make that cure, I suppose the word would be irrelevant, would be to give it some kind of, hey, you think you're okay at first, but it's not going to last very long, or something like that, because then, you know, again, it makes it redundant and you're back to square one. Because otherwise, what are we going to see? Is Bruno Mannheim's going to, like, push this to all of his hospitals? That could be a storyline they go down, but then Clark and Lois find out that what he's actually serving may cure it initially, but it could still end up with death sometime after that. I hope that's what they go down, because it is a very powerful, like, overpowered thing to be able to have this kind of drug that Matteo injected her mother with, and you have to think there's going to be a downfall to it at some point. But I don't know. This is where you guys come in, and that's the episode. So I thoroughly enjoyed it, as per usual, I would say. What did you think about it? Let me know down in the comments below. I've literally just had a glimpse at the promo, and it looks like Onomatopoeia is going crazy, like, as usual. Like, she could bring down a whole block. There's some more Sarah and Jordan drama there. You know, I thought we were friends. So did I. There's not too much to the promo other than the rising threat of Peia. And that actually sparks an interesting question for me. Now that Bruno has cured his wife's cancer, what is next for them? Because everything this whole season has been, you know, about saving her. That's been the threat. Bruno's threat, sending out Henry Miller, experimenting, all of that was a repercussion of, you know, experimenting and trying to get that cure right. Now she's been cured. So I can only assume that maybe through the DOD and whatnot pursuing her, since she is wanted after everything she did this episode, Matteo is technically an accomplice. It might be kind of like a fight to the death thing, like, leave us alone. Bruno's not going to let the government or whoever, Superman, get to his wife and apprehend her, or his sons. No matter what, they're going to keep their family safe. So it just ends up in more destruction, more fights. But I don't know. Let me know your ideas, your theories. Like this video if you did enjoy it, guys. I'd really appreciate that. Do consider subscribing for more videos just like this. But I'm going to love you and leave you now. So again, appreciate you watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow Kryptonians in the next video. Goodbye.